On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Mildred. And Mildred was in a relationship with an abusive addict. It's a story of generational trauma, boundaries, projecting, gaslighting, minimization, intimidation, and custody. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Mildred. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well.
Well, thank you for being here. And if you want to be a guest like Mildred is today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com and you'll see a guest form button at the top of the page. So either click on that guest form or send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@pm.me. Also, join our newsletter, which is at our website on our front page. You'll see that you can sign up for our newsletter, or I'll leave a link in our show notes. And our weekly newsletter will have a workbook for this episode inside that you can click on and download. And it'll have 5 things about this episode as well that you can dive deeper into. Optional if you want to do those things. It can be a very valuable tool. We hear it's a very valuable tool for people. So join our newsletter today. It is free. And today's episode does have a content warning as we do discuss sexual coercion in this episode. And today you'll hear Mildred's story, and Mildred's story is on the shorter end of things as this relationship itself wasn't long, but a lot of abuse did occur in her story, and it will validate your experience as well. It's a story of people in a relationship after getting pregnant, and it's actually a lot more than that as well. It's an interesting story when you see how the abuser's family works and then the post-separation stuff, choices that have to be made, to try to create a stable life for one's child, sacrifices that need to be made in the long term, where there could be a lot of short-term pain, and these are not easy choices to make. So big thank you to Mildred for being our guest today and letting it all hang out there and validating people who have to make these very tough choices every single day. And now I'm going to get out of my way and your way. Mildred, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. I guess so. A little bit about myself is I was actually born in Eastern Europe. It's where my family's from. We moved to the US when I was about 6, lived in Connecticut for a little while, and then mostly grew up in the Pennsylvania area. My childhood was, I can remember some good parts of it, but a lot of it was I had a bad relationship with my father. He was a loosely functioning alcoholic for most of my childhood and was also abusive, like even physically as well. So, that was kind of occupying a lot of my brain space. And, that was kind of my childhood. I started rebelling a little bit. I think I also was trying to really like seek a family unit because I felt really isolated. My family was kind of isolated from the extended family. And I think that's in a large part of what brought me to do certain things in my future that was to come. Yeah, so I would say because of the, abuse, getting hit, and stuff like that, I learned to hide a lot of things at a pretty young age. I couldn't really say what was going on to people. I couldn't really tell them what was going on with me. Couldn't really ask for help. I just sort of had this front of everything was fine. So that already sort of felt like I was isolated and closed off from really connecting with people, I think. The only people who knew were, my parents and my siblings. So I was really close with my, siblings in particular. And we were kind of, like just a really tight unit. No one else really knew what it was like except for us. My dad is 12 years older than my mom, and he's American. He went over to, Eastern Europe to try to start a business when the communists were still there. because he's an idiot, but that didn't work. He at one time told me when he was drunk that he went there purposefully to find a wife because Eastern European women are supposed to be more, what's the word?
Subservient?
Yeah, submissive, essentially. They don't talk back and stuff like that, which isn't true, but that was his kind of mindset. I don't know if he really believes that or not, but that's what he told me. And that definitely stuck with me. And that also framed in my mind a lot of how he views women in general. I think that a lot of the anger that he took out on me was because simply I was a girl and I was a woman and he viewed me a certain way because my, brother didn't receive this sort of treatment. It was just me. So in that way, I think I also started internalizing that stuff and I started thinking that, maybe I am like this, and started kind of have my own internalized sexism, taking it out on my mom, calling her dumb, using all the same language, essentially, not really respecting her because I'm not seeing that out of my dad. I would say my relationships were super naive. I didn't have a good, example of what they should be. My parents weren't very helpful or straightforward about that kind of stuff. So my whole interpretation was if you really love somebody, then they'll really love you. And that's obviously very naive, there's so much more that goes into it. But I was just, a very loyal, dive right in, don't suss things out type of person. And I would say that I also generally kind of dated men or boys, men, whatever, who, had their own issues as well, probably because I wanted to also fix and feel like I was kind of in a way daddy issues. So in a way, I wanted to also help my dad fix my dad. And that was my experience with men. So that was kind of normal for me. As far as religion goes, it's a little bit weird. My mom, is atheist. So in Eastern Europe, most people, are kind of atheist. So there was really nothing there. We had small rituals and kind of traditions from, our past and our culture that we would do. But my dad is a weirdo. So when he was a bachelor in New York before he moved to Eastern Europe, he actually kind of joined a cult. And at that time, it was, I'm seeing all these documentaries now about this sort of thing, but there was this niche group, and it wasn't only in New York, but it was kind of people who were into computer technology that was emerging at that time. And also they were trying to seek enlightenment and stuff. So it's kind of a amalgam of Buddhism, Hinduism, random stuff that's all kind of taken by white people. And there's terms like masters and stuff like that. So eventually you could become a master. And so he kind of believed this and he had books on it. He studied it for a while with this master. And he would have Sunday school with us where he would just talk to us for hours and lecture us on this thing. And, obviously that was grueling and we hated it. And then he would encourage open discourse about it where we could talk about it. But it was just him really talking at us and often would devolve into an argument anyway, that sort of thing. And he didn't really enforce that too hard. It's just only when he kind of felt like it. And so it was a little weird.
Did that influence you in any way as far as relationships go, like having to go through that process? Because, right, yeah, I mean, you're kind of being used here as a prop for or a sounding board under the guise of religious teachings, but it's more of I want to spew what I want to spew. I need an audience.
Yeah. Well, it's performative. So I think a lot of that is what I learned is kind of how to be performative. because, actually engaging with it, I mean, I would, because I was like a stubborn teenager at some point and I just was like so over it. But it just made things worse and would be like hours of just like yelling and condescending and why do you always do this and that sort of stuff. Yeah.
So eventually you're in art school and you end up meeting the person that this story is about. So take us from here.
Yeah, so we met in art school, different kind of focuses. He is 3 years older than me. So didn't really know him too well, but just kind of started hanging out and hooking up, essentially, smoking weed, going to parties with all the other art people. That was kind of all that we were doing. And I didn't necessarily know him too long before I found out that I was pregnant. I went and I took a pregnancy test at my college. And actually, looking back on it, the school didn't handle it well at all, like to help me, I would say. Because I remember going there and taking this test, and then they were like, yeah, it's positive. And then being like, oh my God, like, what do I do? And they were just like, yeah, like, what are you going to do? And I was like, well, I don't know. Like, what are my options here? And I was like, my dad's going to kill me. And then the woman who gave me the test told me, I remember I had an abortion when I was young and I really regretted it for the rest of my life. And I was like, okay. And then that was it. They sent me on my way. Didn't point me into any kind of direction for resources. And I guess at that time, I decided, I was like, okay, let's obviously, the thing about the person that we're talking about is that he comes from a very intense Irish Catholic background. So they don't really do abortions like at all. And when I told him, we both kind of freaked out. But then eventually he was like, I'm going to tell my parents. And then from there, it kind of started snowballing quickly with his parents being like, okay, no problem. Like, we'll support this, like, whatever you need. Maybe you should start living together, maybe eventually get married, all this stuff. I told my parents, and that was obviously terrible. And basically, I ended up moving out and moving into our own place together, our very first place. And yeah, it kind of snowballed from there. Didn't really know each other. Again, I was naive. I was, okay, well, I'm saying I'm coming to this with clean hands, that I'm going to do all I can do and do my best to do this thing. And I would assumed that, he was just as on the same page and, like that with me. Never really thought that it could be so complicated or all these other parts of him that I had never seen.
So here you are with someone who you're having really a casual relationship with. You know them, but really don't know them at all. You're not really looking at this person as like long-term relationship material, so you might not be getting into like the nitty-gritty of who they are, where they come from, what they're hoping for in their life. And now pregnancy happens and it's really a whirlwind. You're just kind of going and it's moving and you're not able to jump off of this train. And all of a sudden you're moving in with someone who you don't know at all, and you're going to have a child with them. So, you know, when you're now in this spot, you start to, I guess, meet his family and everything that's going on there. So, what is that family like? How does it work? And what is the abuser's role within that family?
Yeah, so I would say that's the part that kind of also drew me in initially, is that they have a very big and kind of boisterous, family with a lot of people that all come together during all the holidays. They have all these traditions. I knew that they were Irish Catholic, but I don't think I really was like, oh, they're not like that serious about it. But I didn't know all the ins and outs of it. But I really liked seeing how close the family was. That's what I wanted forever. So seeing this, I was, again, stupid naively was like, oh, great, that'll be my thing now. Like now I'll just make my way into this family. He is the baby of the family. And I didn't know this at the time, but he had been through other substance like issues prior to us meeting and other problems throughout his childhood. And his parents just always took care of everything. But he kind of is and was considered a little bit of the black sheep because the other siblings kind of had their lives together a little bit more. So his mom would often tell me, like, this is great for him. Like, you're gonna you're gonna help him so much. The baby's gonna really like help him get his life together and like give him some direction and all these red flags that I was just like, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, the family, for everything good that I'm also saying, there's a lot of bad. There's a lot of history in the entire family of substance abuse, addiction, suicide. And so, for all the times that they are together and they are friendly and loving and caring, there's a lot of shit talking and drama and other things, as well as a tendency to sort of reject outsiders because the family is very a tight unit. So, yeah, that's kind of what the family was like and his sort of presence in the ecosystem there.
So here you have a family who has the idea of we're this tight family, but we're not really a tight family. No one can mess with us from the outside, but we're allowed to mess with our own.
Yes. Yeah.
And within our family system, you have now attached yourself to the person that they have a big issue with. And by the way, the mom is talking to you, it's like, oh, here's someone to deal with our problem for us right now and give us a little bit of a break, hopefully a long break. They know what this person is like,
Definitely.
and they know what you're about to get. And pretty much they're just like, oh, it's out of our hands for a little bit of time, it sounds like. So,
Yeah.
when it comes to now baby's going to eventually be born, you both have to start taking on responsibilities that are a lot greater than you ever had in your life. So, within, I guess, this first year while you're pregnant, how is your life changed? How are you changing? And what do you start to see from them? Like, when does, I guess, abuse start to take hold?
Basically, like, immediately I was thrown into this thing of like taking care of everything, around the house. All the like typical duties that his mom would do were now like on me. I remember, I mean, this isn't like abusive per se, but it's just like one version where his mom every, birthday would get him a muffin and wake him up with a muffin with a little candle on it, like wake him up like that. And then she was like, "You got to do that." And I was like, why do I got to do that? That's like, a childhood thing that, a parent does or whatever. She's like, he's just used to it. You just go pick up a muffin and you put a little candle in. And I was like, I'm not doing that, you know. Started pushing back a bit on the mom because she was being overbearing to me a lot. And because I didn't go get this muffin, she actually went out, got the muffin, and dropped it off to me, all this stuff. So, like, it was very like passive aggressive, kind of just like you have to do this thing. As far as finally getting to know him and seeing who he was, which was, he would often drink a lot. He would basically be smoking weed all day, every day. And we never really had very deep conversations. It was just very like surface level. And then, like, sexually, there was boundaries crossed like immediately, which like kind of really fucked me up the most, I would say, because really, like, a time when you're like super vulnerable with someone, you're like fully exposed, And he would do and say things that would just like absolutely fuck with my, brain, saying like, oh, I wish I was doing this to this person instead, like as we're having sex and stuff like that. So that was kind of like weird, and I didn't know how to deal with it. Eventually, sometimes he would just like wake up and decide not to go to work that day, and his dad would just like be like, have to deal with it. I remember one morning it was snowing pretty heavily, and he had keys to a vehicle that his dad needed to do some sort of delivery that day. And I was, I don't know, maybe 6 months, 7 months pregnant. And he didn't want to go into work. And he asked me to drive these keys over to his dad's place that morning. And so I drove over these keys all over these like slippery roads as the snowstorm is happening to drop off the keys to his dad. And I could tell like his dad was just like, you know, like, what the hell about it. And that was, yeah, I didn't really feel valued. And the drinking and the constant smoking was becoming an issue.
So you're just in it here. You're both young, and I'm not giving him any excuses at all. But at the very least, he's immature, and at young ages, when these things can happen, things like these can be excused due to someone's age, and abusive relationships can continue because they say like, "Oh, this person can change. They're young. These things can happen." So, with that being said, you're in it here and just going. This is not a great situation to start in. You are doing the housework. Sexual boundaries are crossed, sending you out to drop off keys to the dad. He's really not thinking of you. He's not helping. He has addiction issues. He has family issues, and his family is creeping around and controlling. And now he's about to get obsessed with guns, which is a scary thing. So, what happens from here?
So eventually things just kind of kept going at the pace that they were going, and he was just kind of unchecked. So I knew that he was talking to other people. I knew that he was, online doing stuff with other people. And for some reason, he started becoming obsessed with guns. I'm not sure why or how that became the focus. He was, his dad and brother, I know, like do hunt, but he never really did. But that's kind of sort of, I guess, how it sort of started, where he sort of thought like I could go hunting. And he just kind of kept collecting these guns, and his, parents would buy him even more, like for Christmas or his birthday. And things just kept like he was still like unhinged, like mentally at home, and getting stoned and drinking all the time. I had left. There had been an old box of condoms that we had in, our room, and he had found them and was like yelling and screaming at me that I was like cheating on him and stuff. And that's why there was this box. He had no like memory of even the fact that they had ever been there, that, we had got them a while ago, never even really used them. There was like a full box, but, I don't know if he really thought that or if it was just something that he could use to, lash out at me. Yeah.
So there's accusations of infidelity when he is the one that is cheating online. And so he's projecting and gaslighting here. And then you have the baby. So what happens from here?
So, yeah, when my son was born, it was a tense time. I was primarily taking care of him, waking up, I had like no sleep constantly. So I was on edge, and I was frustrated that I wasn't getting help, from him at all in this way. And yeah, he was just constantly getting high. I mean, I know that a lot of people say you can't get addicted to weed or something, but like, I don't know, he has a very addictive personality. So chain smoking, he would chain smoke cigarettes, smoke weed all day, couldn't like really be sober. There were times when, you know, one major incident that really made me scared was we were having an argument, don't even remember about what, and he knew that it was going to hurt me and scare me, so he took the baby, he took our son, and put him in the car and just drove off with him to like punish me. And that is really when things kind of got serious for me in terms of, wow, okay, now I'm like really confronted with this actual situation where this is it. This can change things. Like, do I call the cops? If I do, there's really not coming back from this, that sort of thing. I decided to first call his family because, that is always who I would kind of call for help if I needed it in these sort of situations. Called his dad. His dad is really the one that I could go to for help. And he said, like, please don't call the cops. Like, I'll get a hold of him, and he'll come like right back. And he did, I guess he did shortly afterward. But, that was terrifying for me, especially like being a new mom that just like popped this baby out a little bit ago, to know that somebody who is, not regulating their emotions and is like screaming and crying and whatever is driving around with him in a car to punish me. So that kind of stuff. And then like coming back and him being like, I wasn't going to do anything and blah, 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 just like downplaying my feelings on everything was always just the norm. And that kind of made me like, at what point do I say this is enough, And that time eventually came when he was getting, like I said, obsessed with guns. He had a few at this point, and his family was getting it for him. And he was kind of like just every night scrolling and looking at more. And I was just like, what's happening here? And I was like, this is it. I feel like this is starting to get to it, because I don't know what he's going to eventually do with these guns. It's just not a great indicator. I was afraid. And eventually one night I confronted him about that, and about just in general, like his drinking, because he was drinking every night. Sometimes he was drinking so much that he would just like get sick and just barf wherever. Sometimes he like fell asleep and would like puke in bed, you know. And I was like, this is getting to be too much. And it became a huge argument where he like even hit the wall next to me. I then immediately called his parents and I told them what was going on. They hadn't really known all that was going on, but they saw him like drinking from time to time, even in public settings and family settings, knowing that they had taken him to recovery before. So I guess they just didn't say anything. And they came over, they took all the guns, and they basically checked him into a rehab center the next morning. He left. And it had to be kind of far away because he had been to one nearby. And once you're in one, you can't go again because they're like, it didn't work, obviously. So you can't come back. So he kind of had to go a little bit further into, I think it was either like New York State or New Jersey. And yeah, he left the next day. And pretty much after that, I was alone. It was terrible. His mom would sometimes like make dinners and just send them over to me. And they'd always be like, how are you holding up? Wasn't holding up good. So I eventually called my family. I told them what was going on. And they were like, you can move here. You can come back. And that's what I decided to do. I decided to leave that situation and move back there because that's where I had my own connections and, where I could work and I could have support.
So once you move back is when you realize that you're not just dealing with an abusive person, that you're dealing with the abusive person's whole family.
Yeah, it was instantly all against me.
So what happens from here? Because your relationship was really 1 year long and you were dealing with what you were dealing with already, but now you're dealing with a family, abusers who have money, and you're trying to raise a child. So take us from here, like what happens right away here with this family?
Well, right away, I am closed off. They see me as an enemy because I decided to leave and I decided that it wasn't acceptable anymore. I think I always was an outsider anyway, but then it was like official. where I was closed off from people. And it kind of instantly became, his parents' mom in particular would call me. And, while he was even in rehab and be like, he needs to know that when he comes out, like that you're going to be there with the baby. The baby will help him like stay sober and and I was just like, that's not my job or the baby's job. Like we've been through enough. And they didn't like that. And eventually what I had to do was I had to file first for, custody before they did, because if they filed, they would have an upper hand in that court in that area. So I had to file first, and that's kind of what kicked everything off. I don't have a lot of money by any means, but he was pretty much totally financially backed by his family. And essentially, they were trying to take the baby from me. They pushed for like full custody, where they were like, if baby's not with his dad, then he'll be being taken care of by his mom, the grandmother. And I was just like, they knew that I wasn't a bad parent. They had always told me before that how great the baby was, and, what a great job I was doing, and that his temperament was great, and that if they had baby like this, they would have had way more. So I know that they didn't think that I was bad, but it was now like me against their family. And they didn't like the fact that I was saying, no, it's not the baby's job to be there. He's an infant at this point, with his dad, who is not stable and okay and freshly out of rehab. I was like, I don't like that. He could maybe come over for some supervised visits, that sort of thing. But all of this stuff, me setting any kind of terms, was not acceptable. So, that sort of kicked off where things started. And that's when a lot of the like verbal abuse and other sort of abuse started coming in from the father, my ex, and it still continues to this day, sort of like a barrage. Like as soon as he's triggered, there's like a slew of insults and other things that have to come my way. Eventually, the courts granted that he should be with me primarily, and that occasionally he would go on some visits there, which I didn't really love, seeing as he was an infant. But, they made the case that the family could help and watch and take care of him. Eventually, the other time he kept, like going back through the courts, like constantly filing and, over. And, it was kind of draining me financially. I didn't have a career. I was working in restaurants at this time, like running kitchens or whatever. And so it was a really stressful time in my life. Just had to kind of keep fighting those. And he kept like fighting. And I know it was coming from his parents for a little bit more, like to move the flag a little bit more and more. And then eventually we kind of existed at a status quo for a little bit. But then a time came where I met someone, and we had known each other for about a year. He was, probably one of the more healthy relationships that I've had, although this person was also significantly older than me. But I decided to move like a half an hour from where I had been to this other place so that we could live together. And that was kind of like a job that I had there. And that was like absolutely not okay. It was a whole other court thing, even though it was only a half an hour, like, move. We had to go to court for it. I had to petition the court. It went all the way to trial. I had to speak to a judge and tell them that this was just like in the child's best interest too, so that he could have a stable, he couldn't live with me all by myself forever. And she granted it. And so that really pissed him off. But that's how we lived for a while, for most of my son's early childhood, up until he was like about 8 or so, which is when my relationship, I realized it wasn't going to go anywhere. And it was kind of a tough time in my life. I felt really torn because I was kind of realizing that I kept getting into these relationships, with men and becoming dependent on them. And to some extent, that was because of the start that I had, where I didn't get to finish college. And, I had a baby when I was 19 and all this stuff that sort of made me dependent on people. And I realized that wasn't very healthy for me or the future of my son. And so I had been working at this time. I'd gotten out of restaurants and I had been working in design, but I was kind of limited as to how much I could earn or learn. So eventually I got a job offer for a place in, a bigger city. And it's one that I hadn't been to before. And it's a little bit more of a distance. So I was kind of torn. I knew that if I took this job, that he would drag me through the courts for years to get me to not move. So I was, what do I do that's in my son's best interest for the future? And I had talked to him. At this time, we had sort of had a somewhat stable, I mean, there were still like moments of flaring, but somewhat stable relationship where I told him that this was kind of my intention. And I asked him if he would accept, taking on a primary parent role for a year or two while I got established, and then it could be looked at again. And of course, he was like, yeah, absolutely. And it was really hard. I had to drop him off and then I drove away. I knew that it was going to probably be a whole mess to petition to even get him back. But in the long run, I think that it was going to be good for all of us. That's kind of where I am now, is I'm still in the city. Since then, like COVID has hit. So my son, he's older now. So he's like 13. He has a whole, social group there, friends that he's known for a long time. And now it's kind of like I'm kind of an asshole if I keep trying to go back and like tear him away from the stability that he does know. I would say that the benefits of me being here is that I was able to really work on my career. And I have done that over the course of 4 to 5 years, where I'm at a position and income like where I wanted to be, where I can provide insurance for him, all these things that I knew that his dad, wasn't going to really be doing. So yeah, it's kind of double-edged sword with that.
So, what are the biggest issues that are always kind of going on between you and your abuser at this point? And how is the relationship with him and your son? And what are your feelings about all of this? I mean, you're not right now the primary parent and you want to be there for your son. You don't want to like uproot your son, which is the right thing to do. But at the same time, are you acting as like the safe parent here? And how are you protecting yourself?
Yeah, so recently, this happened about a year ago. I was pretty much set on like, okay, this is, what it's going to be. My son has a good, stable friend group there. He's taken care of, by his family. I know what his dad is like and what he's like to me. But, you know, according to my son, he's good, but at the same time, I knew how his family was, in terms of like making children responsible for adults, like by saying that the baby would be good for him, the baby would keep him sober, etc. And so, there were times when he ended up having another baby with someone, and they broke up, had a huge messy breakup around the time that the baby was born. And it's during this time that I discovered that he had been arrested a year prior and charged with a felony for something that was kind of equally disturbing in terms of like him, exposing himself to someone. And again, he'd never shared this with, of course, he hadn't shared it with me. It had been all swept under the rug. And when I figured this out, I was like, whoa, like, my son is on the very edge now. And I was like, this, I guess I should like petition. Like, I need to like petition. I need to do all that I can at this point to try to keep my son in a safe environment, because I see that this isn't changing. So that's what I did. I petitioned the court for custody and to basically look into this, all of this. And, that was expensive. Found a lawyer. I had to get a lawyer that was there rather than around me. And didn't go great. I had to eventually even hire basically a second attorney one that would represent my son's best interest out of recommendation from my lawyer. So things started adding up pretty quickly. But eventually, the recommendation of the court after even everything was that he should remain there because he's established there and he has all of these, connections there with his friends and extended family. And they also take into account my son's wishes because they, spoke with him as well. And it's possible that he said, I don't want to move. I want to be there. So all of that, kind of happened. And I'm at the point now where I'm going to move there, I think, in 6 months or so. I want to be there for the new school year because I know that my son needs me. He needs another place to go. It's a very different environment when he's with me. We're much more open, much more relaxed, very different. So, yeah, I know, I realize now, and now that, things have changed since COVID with like remote work and that sort of thing, like I know that I can probably set something up for myself where I can do that. So that's kind of my main priority now.
And as far as you go from the person at the beginning of this story and the childhood that you had and now going through, this experience, what has kind of shifted or changed in you as far as your path goes? You're back on your 2 feet in the sense of, well, you had this baby, you had to leave school, and then you're kind of going job to job. And now you're on this really strong financial part, and you are able to provide for you and your child in a way that now their dad wouldn't be able to. So you got yourself there. But as far as emotionally and all the trauma that has occurred, you know, are what are your thoughts on your whole history, and have you been working on a lot of those things?
Yeah. Well, luckily I have, a good psychiatrist and I've been in therapy for some time. I would say, that this, I'm definitely way different from where I started. I'm definitely disenfranchised, I would say, with relationships in general. I think that a lot of the time they are distractions for me from actually the primary one that I should be focused on, which is my child. A lot of the time, I have had a pretty serious, significant relationship since I had moved here, where we were together for about 3 years, and then also realized that they had like BPD and other narcissistic tendencies. Since then, especially, I would say I've really taken a step back to evaluate kind of what it is that keeps drawing me in to these, or how these people with personalities and disorders like this kind of keep ending up in relationships with me. I'm at the point where I like kind of my own, independence and being alone. I like hanging out with people. I have friends. I've invested a lot more in friendships, I would say, versus significant, intimate relationships with people. Because I also realized that when I pour everything into one person, and then when we break up, I have nothing, and I don't think that's right and healthy. So I decided after my last significant breakup to really invest in friendships. And that has really been the most rewarding, I think, for me, learning experience. I think that I'm always going to be dealing with my ex's abuse. Now it's just going to be like 5 more years, I guess, but he'll always kind of be in my life to some extent because we have a child together. And now that I'm going to be moving there, I am concerned about me getting triggered, me being around all these familiar places that I associate with a bad time. But I know that there's an end. It's not going to be forever. So that kind of is comforting for me. Yeah. And I think like at least I can be proud of myself for the steps that I've taken. They were hard decisions, especially like when I wasn't the primary parent anymore. I cried every day, every night. I felt like a deep wound, and I would say that wound hasn't really healed. But I would say that at least unemotionally stepping back and looking at it, I made the right call to pursue my career so that I could be independent of anybody. And I think there's safety in that.
And if you had any words of wisdom for everyone listening, what would they be?
I would say, you're not alone. And actually, that was the most encouraging when I started listening to your podcast, was hearing other people's experiences and realizing that there's a community out there of us, the people who have to deal with this every day and work through it. Other people, maybe their relationships have ended, but I know other people that are going to be in continuous contact with their abusers. My advice would be try to find your own independence. It's hard and it could be emotionally taxing. There is no right way, I guess, but you just try your best. But if you can be independent and take care of yourself on your own 2 feet, that's very commendable and offers you security.
Well, Mildred, I really want to thank you for being here with me, with us today, sharing your story. And, you know, sometimes you get out of the relationship quicker than most people, which you did, but then you have to deal with the aftermath and who's there. And I'm sorry you had to go through all these things, but you really, within that experience today, you're able to help a lot of people by sharing your story. And I really can't thank you enough for being here with us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mildred, for being our guest today. And once again, if you want to be a guest like Mildred was today, go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com, click on the guest form at the top of the page, or send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@pm.me. And we'll also have in our show notes a link to our newsletter if you want to sign up for a newsletter. And also at our website, we have a support group. So if you want to join our support group at our website, narcissistapocalypse.com, you'll see that we have Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights, forum boards for you to post on. It's a great group of people there. So if you need support, join our support group today. And that is it for today's survivor story, for today's episode. So for myself and Mildred, we hope you have a good night.